I want to ask you about the process of talking about your movie. How long have you been doing press for Damsels?
Let me see. I suppose in a certain way, even before we started shooting, because there are a couple of people who approached me even before we had the publicity apparatus going. So a woman who's writing something for First Things, which I couldn't quite understand because it's mostly theological. And then some fellows who were writing something for New York Magazine. I had lunch with them even before we shot. So it's been a long time.
It's a long haul, yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me, do you find something valuable about the process, obviously in getting the word out about your film, but does it kind of elucidate your anything for you about why you chose this material or the experience overall?
Yeah, it does help. It actually does help me understand some things. I mean, it's particularly good when I do it jointly with actors because I hear things, from their point of view that I didn't really know. So I found out that Great Gerwig actually likes rehearsal, and I found out things the actors were doing to create their character that I, was enjoying, but not really understanding the mechanics of what they were doing. So it was helpful, that way.
You, recently I spoke to Larry Kasdan, and he'd been away from making movies for some time, but he had been working, and he said that you work on something for years and it doesn't come together, and all of a sudden the years kind of pass by. Has that been the case for you?
Absolutely. I mean, I was originally not that sort of depressed and desperate about it because I find the challenge writing the script and the details of the script, and a lot of that was going really well, and I had this sort of tendency, if there's any slowness or frustration with one project, say, well, great, I'll write this other idea that I wanted to do. So I was sort of enjoying a little bit the chance to do work on one idea after another, but then it started seeming a bit desperate that nothing was happening. I think around 2006, I started getting a little desperate about it.
But tell me about that writing process, because a lot of people find great joy in it, and others find it extremely painful.
I find that suspect if they find great joy in it. I mean, I think there can be, times of joy, and there can just, I am happier with it than I used to be. Maybe that's a bad sign. And I just don't really know how it all happens or should happen, and I'd really try everything. I found it almost useful to do the reverse of what Mr. McKee used to say in his course you should never do. He said you should never, find your story through scenes and your scenes through dialogue and your characters this way or that way. He thought you should have a plan for the whole thing before you start, and I find that just is death for me to have a plan before I start, because the initial ideas you get tend to be very hackneyed and not very interesting.
Well, and there's a tendency. I'm not a writer necessarily, but there seems to be a tendency to kind of map out everything before you write it, where you actually write the script before you write the script in a way.
Yeah, I find that terrible. And this whole idea of like a detailed pitch or an outline or a treatment, I think it's deathly in its results, and I've really regretted it every time I've been sort of obliged to do a treatment-like outline. It's been terrible to get out from under the very bad ideas you initially have.
Well, given your approach, do you surprise yourself in the writing process? Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, that's what I like. I like it when I sort of feel that the characters and the story have its own autonomy, that sort of material is appearing, and characters are doing stuff that I hadn't thought of before. Mm-hmm. And that I want to be surprised and amused as it goes along. I don't want to know how it's going to. Generally you could sort of know, well, this girl is going to end up with this guy, but not always. Sometimes you change your mind later on. And that isn't really the meat of it. That's the ostensible plot or whatever, but it's not really what are going to make people happy or sad about your project.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you're an avid movie watcher of more recent films.
I mean, I love watching films if I think I'm going to like them. I've given up trying to keep up with the sort of the buzz on films. I mean, I used to have something I called an Oscar season depression because we are bombarded with invitations to glorious events to see new films that were Oscar candidates, and I ended up going to see a lot of films I never would have seen originally, right out of the gate, because there's some fabulous event and everyone talks about this film, how important it is, or blah blah blah. And so I sort of now only want to go initially to the films that appeal to me, that I think, oh, I'll enjoy that film, and sort of I'm not trying to keep up with every film that people think might be Oscarable.
Right.
But I love tiny comedies and small things, and I have been going to festivals sometimes on the juries where you have to see 21 or more films, and that can be kind of a grueling experience because art film selection for festivals now has taken on a kind of sadomasochistic air, but occasionally you find these little gems you wouldn't have heard about before.
Yeah, and that's why I asked for a couple of reasons. First of all, how do you feel? What do you feel about the current landscape, particularly of independent film? What discourages you, and what encourages you about it?
Well, there are a lot of good little films out there. The problem is finding out about them, because normally they have no ad budgets, and you really have to keep your eyes open. There's this Italian film that I saw at one of these sort of social screenings, and thank gosh I had gotten invited to it. It was called, I think, Mid-August Lunch, and it was just a delightful Italian film. And then at the Stockholm Film Festival, I saw a Swedish film. The original Swedish title is Katinka's Party, and they're calling it here Certain People. And it's actually showing in the Tribeca Festival this week. I think there's a screening on Sunday. And so I recommend the film, Swedish film Certain People, in the Tribeca Festival.
Well, Damsels in Distress, it's it's an incredibly charming movie. You've said that it's kind of your romantic fantasy film.
Yeah.
And it does have more of a kind of fantasy element than your previous films, but is there still an autobiographical element to it for you?
I mean, there's certain, Damsels in Distress has certain sort of autobiographical truths, but they're sort of buried within characters that are very unlikely, so I don't think it's easily identifiable. I mean, someone who knew me very well would see some things, but I mean, I love it when you can take some stuff that's personal and then make it really impersonal and just silly and funny. And there's a lot of silliness in this film.
Yeah. Oh, it's a terrific movie. But another point, that's something that characterizes all of your work. I mean, these are characters, and that's another reason why I ask about modern films that you've seen. A lot of your characters, if you see them portrayed in other films, they tend to be mocked and parodied.
Yeah,
but
they'd be that bad fraternity in Animal House.
Yeah, they would be. And do you find? I mean, where does that come from? Your impulse to kind of humanize those characters.
Well, I guess the point of view is we're mocking them, we're having fun with them from within rather than from without, and so we're sort of on their side, and yet there's still a lot of humoristic comedy about them. So I don't think they're being glorified exactly, but I mean, I love a kind of warmth in comedy. I like what the Scottish director Bill Forsyth used to do, and Preston Sturges used to do. I mean, Preston Sturges sort of brought a love to the worlds he described, like Miracle of Morgan's Creek, and I find that really a sympathetic, way of approaching the material.
Well, and you find that your feelings about certain characters in your films can change in the course of watching the films. I mean, you're programmed in a way to think that some of these characters are pompous, unrelatable, but then they grow on you and you begin to love them. What is the key to finding that as a writer? Is it in finding kind of a vulnerability in a character?
I think there's that. There are the problems they have that the world dishes out for them and how they deal with those problems. But I also think something that's interesting are sort of contradictions in character where it doesn't quite make sense, and yet this is the way people are. So one thing that I think made Metropolitan popular was the character Chris Eigeman plays, because ostensibly he's a very snotty, obnoxious, extreme character, but he takes under his wing and is very kind to this sort of timid outsider character played by Ed Clements, the Tom Townsend character. And so that thing of this guy who, gosh, he really should be the bastard in the group, but actually he's a nice guy, keeps him interesting and keeps him kind of funny.
Well, and there seems to be some kind of pull between idealism and cynicism. I mean, do you feel that?
I mean, there are two things that I don't see in the films much. I don't see much cynicism in the films, and I don't see much satire. I mean, people kind of throw the word satire around kind of loosely because, you know, the original meaning of the Latin or whatever was tearing of the flesh, and so there, you know, should be some sort of cruelty or anger in satire, and I hope we don't really have much cruelty or anger in the film.
I don't see that. Yeah, I
sort of like this sort of broad comedy approach. And although, you know, these films, The Damsels in Distress is, you know, a minority film, it's a specialty film, it's not getting big distribution. It's kind of people have to kind of look for it to see where it's going to play in their neighborhood. I adore big comedy. I adore Will Ferrell comedies. I adore Anchorman and Elf and Old School. And, you know, I'm not sure I've met Will Ferrell and I really like him, but I'm not sure if I'll ever kind of get to direct one of those big, broad comedies. But in Damsels in Distress, I loved it when part of the story veered off into that kind of land, and I really enjoyed that. And I think sometimes it's hard for the kind of very serious specialty film audience to go on that journey because they see material that's really, really dumb. I mean, some of the problems these guys have are idiotic problems. And yet what's funny about it is what the actors, you know, do with that, kind of the absurdities they do. There are two guys who play the frat boys in Damsels in Distress. Ryan Metcalf plays Frank, and Billy Magnuson plays Thor, two guys at this fraternity. And they're really funny performers, and they came in with their performances, their roles sort of already made to the auditions, and they just sort of go to town with these parts, and they were doing all kinds of stuff I wasn't really aware of, like Ryan as Frank has this special walk he does, and when he explained it to me, or when I heard about it, I sort of focused on that. And when we were doing the Foley footsteps, I tried to sort of accentuate his walk so he didn't lose what he was doing.
Do you find that happens a lot? I mean, especially when you find the right actors, that they kind of redefine the roles that you've written for you?
In this case, that's true. I mean, more than in any of the films, the actors really added a huge amount to the characters. And, I mean, sometimes people ask me, is there ad-libs, or is there improvisation in the films? And generally there isn't at all as improvisation with the words. But the actors bring so much other stuff to what's going on. I mean, Zach Woods from The Office did a big scene in the Daily Complainer, the school newspaper, and he is a great improv guy, and he was sort of improving stuff with the script, but it wasn't changing the words. It was just sort of the way he approached it. He did add something at the end, and he says "bravo" and applauds at the end, and that was really good. But that's probably the only improvised word in the film.
Well, I saw an interview with Adam Brody. And he was chatting about your approach to actors, and what surprised him most was how kind of hands-off you were in dictating what you wanted with the character. You were more invested in asking him his thoughts and his take on particular things.
Adam really helped us out because we had a scene where I had to cut one of the scenes he and Annalie Tipton did. It was far too prolix for the end of the movie, and we were shooting in this interesting bar location in Staten Island, and we got ahead of schedule, which was not something that happens all the time in my films. And so I thought, well, we'll go and do this scene now, and I just cut it severely. And he said, I could learn this and I could do it, but I can do it much better if we can do it tomorrow. And I really rely sometimes on actors to be the conscience of the creative part of the character, because I get sort of in producer mode and just want to do what's efficient and quick. And the actors are really serious about, their character, their part, and how it's going to come across. And, I mean, Adam was good from the get-go. It was a godsend to us because we found no one who could play the romantic lead. I mean, it was so hard to find an actor who could do that. And he was just right. He was great. So the first time he and I were, like, in our first meeting, we went over a scene together, and he had it. And so, you don't really have to do work with the actor there. I can't think of, maybe he had some mannerism that there was some comment on, but he really, really is good with material.
Was this one a difficult one to cast? Because you talk about the contradictions in characters. I mean, a lot of actors, I think, could play these as types or have that kind of temptation to do that.
We had a terrifying audition, the first group of auditions in New York. Fortunately, we'd had some really promising auditions in Los Angeles right off the bat, where I saw Megalyn, who plays Rose, Annalie, who plays Lily, and Aubrey Plaza, who ultimately could only be in a cameo because of her schedule in California. But I had three, actresses who came in right away who were great for the film. And so that was reassuring. We started casting in New York, and I expected it was going to be really good. And the first day, no one was getting the material, and it was just sounding terrible. And I think, oh, my God, this script is terrible. And then a girl came in and read it, and it was just beautiful. It was really funny. It was terrific. She loved the script, and it sort of redeemed the casting session to have this one performer who was so good. And it was actually Lena Dunham. And I hadn't heard about Tiny Furniture. I think Tiny Furniture was just about to go to South by Southwest, and I saw that and really liked it. And she actually helped our production by recommending her co-producer, Alicia Vancouvering, who sort of set up our low-budget production. And the enthusiasm for the script from people like Lena and Greta Gerwig, who are kind of influential in their groups, was very helpful for us.
Oh, and Greta is just transcendent in the movie.
She's wonderful. She's wonderful.
I don't know how much time I have with you, but I just have two more quick questions.
Sure.
Being away as you have for 12, 13 years from directing, did it feel like a different experience at all for you?
Not really. I mean, there are good shoots and bad shoots. There's good environment and bad environment. The first time I made a film, I was already getting on. I was 37 when I started Metropolitan, so I had all those years of not directing, and it really kind of came easily. I mean, it was kind of great to shoot the first film, and it was kind of great to come back and shoot this. And we had a super young crew. I mean, I think that almost no one was over 27 working on the production, except in post-production, I had some of my veteran collaborators. Andy Hayfitz, I've worked on 4 projects with. He's the editor. Mark Swaza, the composer, has been on all the films I've done. So in post-production, I had colleagues of closer to my generation. But the shoot was kind of a Pied Piper in reverse situation, because they were kind of leading me into new technology, because the digital cinematography now is so good.
Well, you mentioned the kind of the younger generation that populate your films, and you do seem to be concerned with that period of time where, I mean, the lives kind of define themselves to take on a certain direction. Are there other landmarks that are equally meaningful and profound in the 40s or where you are now?
I mean, I've other stories that'll be different thing. I mean, it's sort of the happenstance of the story a bit. I'm delighted when I get a chance to work in this age group, because you have a chance for casting of new people who aren't encumbered with sort of huge groups of publicists and managers, and are eager for the experience and normally really great. And so it's great to be able to put new people on the screen. But the other stories I'm working on won't be the same dynamic necessarily.
Last question. Criterion's releasing the Blu-rays of Metropolitan and Last Days of Disco.
That's great, yeah.
This summer. When you look at your work, these films, these 4 films, what evolution do you see?
Well, sometimes I resent getting clobbered over the head whenever I have a new film. Like there's someone who really likes one of the older films, kind of beats me up about it. So I've noticed that the people who like Barcelona a lot sort of beat us up sometimes about Damsels in Distress. I don't know why. But I go back, I see the films in retrospective screenings and stuff like that, and there's a lot of really awkward stuff in Metropolitan. It looks really, really funky, and the Super 16, some problems with that, and so I think that there is sort of the golden haze of memory in some people's minds. They imagine like these fantastic pieces of work from the past and they sometimes aren't that fair to whatever the new thing is. And I really want people to see, the new film while it's on screen, because it's such a kind of rare moment of having that collective experience of people going to the cinema and, afterwards they go out for dinner or drinks or whatever and talk about it. And I went to a party last night and there were all these people who were just so keen on seeing the film, and they're sort of friends, but it's been on screen here for nearly 3 weeks and they actually hadn't been yet. So I was chiding them for that.
It's changing, isn't it? And it's discouraging that, especially films of the independent realm, you're more likely to have them purchased at home than people actually going out to the theater now to see them.
Yeah, and the digital projection in theaters is so wonderful. People really should check it out, because if they can get a DCP screening, it looks really great. I mean, I find it hard to watch the released prints now after having seen the DCP.